Okay, people, I think we should begin. Says 10 there. The others can join us. A very brief review of some of the important points we did in the last class. One important set of ROS reactions in the cell. A 4-electron reduction of oxygen gives us water, and that's the basic place where oxygen is required in the cell. The electron transport chain, and that's where it happens. So these are the details, the electronic details of the reduction process. 1 electron reduction of oxygen gives you superoxide, 1 electron reduction of superoxide gives you hydrogen peroxide, and 1 electron reduction of hydrogen peroxide gives you hydroxyl radicals, and 1 electron reduction of hydroxyl radicals gives you water. Okay. So this is good to remember. We'll see it many times, of course. Then we saw what antioxidants were, and at this moment, or at this point in time, an antioxidant is understood as a species that delays, blocks, or even mitigates oxidative damage to a biomolecule in focus. Okay, then we looked at various antioxidants that are available in the cell, to the cell. Some are synthesized in the cell and some need to be provided through food. Okay. Good. Then we started looking at some important aspects that we need to keep in mind, which are normally ignored. We talked about RS homeostasis, which is necessary for the proper functioning of the cell, a balance between production and consumption rates. That's essentially what leads to homeostasis. So there has to be a certain homeostatic level that is maintained by the cell, which is different at different points in the cell cycle or the lifetime of the cell, and so on and so forth. And it also differs with the kind of cell. For example, the cancer cells have a high level of homeostatic level, the stem cells have low homeostatic levels, and so on. And of course, the desired level could vary with time, which essentially leads to rhythms. And we are talking of the rhythms in the pseudo steady state levels. We are always comparing the levels in the cell with respect to a certain growth, which happens at a much slower pace. Therefore, compared to the growth process, the kinetics of the reactive species are much faster, and therefore we could assume them to be at pseudo steady state. And therefore, whatever we measure at a particular point in time corresponds to the pseudo steady state, and it gives us a good insight into the oxidative state of the cell, direct oxidative stress of the cell, because the reactive species are the ones that cause oxidative stress. So you went through our transport video on pseudo steady state level to brush up yourselves, and for people who haven't gone through the transport course, it might be a good way to understand pseudo steady state. And we are looking at the pseudo steady state levels of reactive species whenever we measure them indirectly. And also for people who do not have an engineering background, none here, they might want to look through this. Okay, now we start afresh. Any questions, comments till now, and whatever aspect?
I didn't get in the previous slide you told about cancer cells having high homeostatic levels of RS and stem cells having lower homeostatic level. So, like, I first of all didn't get what homeostatic level is actually.
Okay, good. In the normal course of events, at a certain point in time, there is a certain desired level of reactive species in the cell, needed in the cell. Okay, because reactive species play an important role in cell signaling, as we take a look at. I mean, we won't do too much detail. We take a look at some principles in chapter number 4. Okay. In a few weeks from now, we'll take a look at that, some details. So for essential functions of the cell, a certain level of reactive species is required. So far we have been seeing that the reactive species are bad for the cell and so on. So which is true, it's certainly true, which is the more popular view. But they have an essential role to play in the functioning of the cell. So the level that enables a proper functioning of the cell is called the homeostatic level. But a homeostatic level enables a certain proper functioning of the cell. It's essentially the balance that is achieved by appropriate production rates and appropriate consumption rates. Consumption could be through other reactions, other reasons in the cell, and so on and so forth. So that is what we mean by a homeostatic level. So homeostasis is a certain balanced level. You have homeostatic level for various different species. In this case, we are talking of the homeostatic level for the reactive species, reactive oxygen species especially, and so on. You can talk of homeostatic level for many different compounds.
We have this, if we compare the homeostatic levels of our normal cells with cancer and stem cells, so cancer has a much higher homeostatic level.
Yes.
Which means it consumes and produces at a really high.
Yeah, the production could be higher or the consumption could be lower. Consumption in the sense the negation of reactive species, the what shall I say, devouring of reactive species, the negation of reactive species by various antioxidant enzymes. That could be lower, production rates could be higher. Typically the production both happen. Production rates are higher, this is lower. So it results in a certain higher level of reactive species at any point in time, and that level varies. You can say the concentration in the cell, certainly in that context it makes sense. However, for use we talk of levels, which is amount per cell. Is that amount per cell can easily be translated into various different purposes. Whereas if you talk of concentration, then you talk of a certain amount per certain volume. Which volume are we talking about? Are we talking of the entire cell volume? Are we talking of the cytoplasmic volume alone? Now, all these things come into question. So we do measure concentrations. Concentrations are the ones that can be easily measured. So we measure concentration of this reactive species, oxygen species. Let's say specific, we do specific reactive oxygen species measurements, superoxide, hydroxyl, and so on. Then we divide by the cell concentration, viable cell concentration. So that gives an idea as to what the amount per cell is. That's what we deal with. Okay, our medical doctor is here, and we went through a revision mainly for that purpose. Anyway, I think the important point is yet to come. So we are talking of pseudo steady state levels. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at those videos. These two videos, yeah. These two videos are important to understand what a pseudo steady state level is and why is it actually, why rates are needed is covered in the second video. That's for a person who doesn't have a quantitative background. Okay, now let's continue. We saw ill effects. We started looking at that because that is what is well known, and therefore it's good to relate to that first. Ill effects of oxygen on even healthy humans and their cells. This is despite the fact that they have antioxidant defense systems. That's the way it is. And common explanation of the ill effects in the presence of cellular antioxidants could be as follows. The cell has a certain capacity to handle a certain level of reactive oxygen species, and when the production rates are higher, the cell cannot handle. And if you look at it this way, it's highly limiting. This is widely prevalent view is limiting because the cell is a dynamic system. Rather, let me not talk of rates as yet. Cell's capacity to handle a certain level of reactive oxygen species. Okay, follow this argument a little carefully. This widely prevalent view is limiting because the cell is a dynamic system. It changes with time. Okay, all those amount, volume ideas are fine if there is no change with time. Whenever you encounter any system which changes with time, those are highly limiting views. You need a rate view. That's the essential point here. So it is ever changing with time. if you talk about cell's capacity and so on and so forth, this view ignores the fact that there could be a continuous generation or degradation of reactive oxygen species and that of the antioxidants that results in a net level. We are talking of the net level. So let this point sink in a little bit. So let me read it again. This widely prevalent view is limiting because the cell is a dynamic system. It is ever changing with time. The view ignores the fact that there could be continuous generation or degradation of reactive oxygen species and the antioxidant that result in a net level of reactive oxygen species. Okay. So the generated intercellular reactive species are countered or managed by the antioxidant systems that are already present in the cell, which could already be present when the production happens. Enzymatic protein-based antioxidants that are generated by transcription translation in response to the generated reactive oxygen species. Right. So you have some housekeeping enzymes, some housekeeping antioxidants that are already present, which could handle as and when they are generated, they start generating. And of course, there's a cell's response machinery that gets into place, and you have proteins, the antioxidant proteins that are transcribed, translated to handle the generated reactive species. However, in the context of a dynamic system, it is important to realize that generation and quenching occur simultaneously. It's not that one is generated and then it is quenched. Okay. From a single molecule point of view, it's fine. Okay, you of course need to have superoxide generated before superoxide dismutase can quench it. That is perfectly fine. But to extend it in toto to a dynamic system will cause difficulties. Okay. So because the generation and quenching occur simultaneously, they are reactions. Many presentations give the impression that generation and quenching are sequential, which is fine. While a RS molecule needs to be generated first to be quenched, the processes of RS generation and quenching occur simultaneously in a dynamic system. Any questions on this? Let me read it again. In terms of molecules, while RS molecule needs to be generated first to be quenched, the processes of RS generation and quenching occur simultaneously in a dynamic system where you have pools of various things, and the dynamics is entirely different. Okay. Availability dynamics is entirely different. Okay. Keep this in mind, which is usually missed. Any questions on that at this stage? Okay, when I start presenting some consequences, you will understand the difficulty with this view, which people kind of assume because they think in terms of molecules. It is fine. Certainly, it is well proved that superoxide dismutase interacts with superoxide and negates it. Fully understood, mechanism is properly understood. In fact, yesterday in the seminar also we were talking about the same thing. Ankita was there. So this is one such thing. Okay, let's move forward. To illustrate, yeah, this comes up right away. Let us consider the extent of RS damage to cells in a medical context, okay, of special consideration to our medical person. Damage to cells by reactive species can be measured by some assays, which is done in appropriate context, appropriate medical context. Such assays can provide only the extent of damage that has already happened, mostly irreversibly. The reactive species damage is usually irreversible. Okay. So from a cell point of view, the damage is irreversible. The assays can tell you how much damage has already happened. The damage extent provides a cumulative measure of reactive species effects, not the effect at that point in time. Okay. Whatever has been done is done. Pretty much nothing can be done to whatever has been done, right? The idea is to save whatever remains rather than worry about that, but people don't recognize this. Therefore, such a measure has only a diagnostic value. You know how much damage has happened. Treatment or therapeutic decisions are usually made to save the remaining parts of the tissue or the cell. If you base your decision on the amount of damage that has already happened, then you're completely off. Okay. So remember this. Thus, a measure of the current status is needed for meaningful therapy decisions with respect to reactive species. Okay. So assays which give you the extent of biomarkers, especially which are very common, very popular, be a little careful of basing therapeutic decisions on biomarker data, right, and so on and so forth. The basic idea is that most assays give you cumulative effects of damage, which is fine for a diagnostic kind of a thing. This much damage has happened. However, if you want to decide on therapy, don't base things entirely on that. That gives you an idea, yes, but don't base things entirely on that. Is one of the things that can be taken from this. Somebody wants to write down, or I'll leave it on for a couple of minutes. But many of these many of these things that you measure for medical purposes, the popular ones that you measure for medical purposes, have a problem. I have a problem with them. I have a problem with them. That's all I should say. Start with blood sugar. Okay. You have a certain blood sugar value. What does it mean? Sugar is not getting into cells, right? And therefore, it's not providing energy to the cells and so on and so forth. Therefore, it's accumulating in the blood, right? So, the most important point is the cell is not functioning properly, okay? Most of these drugs, they are designed to pass a test of how much sugar is there in the blood, which is an indicator, yeah, right? But most of those are designed for that rather than taking care of the original difficulty, right? The original difficulty is sugar is not being, glucose is not being properly utilized, right? What does metformin do? Predominantly, it cuts off glucose generation by the liver, okay? So, you have essentially to pass a test of a certain number in the blood, nothing else. It does nothing to take care of the actual problem. Similarly, BP, both of these. Okay, I have this, I went through some personal difficulty, that's a reason. Let me tell you the story. This was about 12 years ago, yeah. 12 years ago, I believe that, yeah, I mean, you should watch, you should measure and all that, but don't intervene too much till things get bad is my point of view, okay, my personal point of view. I will not impose it on others, but my personal point of view. I have grown up in a family of medical doctors. I know what medicines can do, the side effects and so on and so forth, and therefore I'd like to take a balanced view. Medicines isn't necessary, certainly. I mean, if necessary, I do take medicines. I'm not against them. But at the same time, overuse of medicines is not something that I prescribe. So, I was dragged for a physical. I was fine, right? Walk in, they start doing these various things. My BP was 165 by 105, right? Have I told you the story earlier? No. Yeah, no, like transport, I wouldn't have told you the story. So, 165 by 105, right? So, and this was in a big hospital in Chennai. So, our man, a heart specialist, writes a list of 4 medicines, including a blood thinner, right? Take it for a year, come back. I understood a bit of biochemistry. Yeah, right? Of course, one statin. This was before the 2014 quiet dropping of statins from the routine by the American Heart Association. Right, after 50 years of pressing for that, and so on and so forth. Okay, 4 different medicines, including the 4th one was a blood thinner. I didn't understand why. I came and checked what it does, what's the molecule, what does it do, and so on and so forth. So I didn't quite understand it. And then I said, going all the way there, about 25 kilometers away, is not normal. And blood pressure, if it's a problem, it's a problem. So might as well start the IIT hospital, going to the IIT hospital. It's blood pressure problem. So I went to the specialist here. Person started his own way of looking at it, and they usually go through this ABCD business for blood pressure. Okay, angiotensin blocker, beta blocker, calcium channel blocker, diuretic. Because it's multifactorial BP. Nobody knows. You need to figure out what your real problem is, and maybe there's a combination of problems. So I think doing one by one. I think they started with a A and then they went to a C for some reason. This was over a period of a year and a few months. Doctor says you should do it, right? Yeah. So went and did that. I was new to it. And the society says it is important to do such things. So I did that, and somewhere in the middle, person would, whenever I go to the hospital, 170 by 105, 170 by 110, so on and so forth. At home, it was fine, right? And I used to use a bicycle to go. Then I used a bicycle inside till I moved out. So I would, okay, I'll come to that part of the story later. And then, so whenever measurement happened, it didn't come down. So our person went on changing doses, this, that. Calcium blocker was horrible on me. The person changed it, and the person used to come. The appointment was once in 3 weeks. So once in 2 weeks or once in 3 weeks, I think. Yeah, once in 3 weeks at that point in time. So calcium channel blocker just, put me down completely. I used to drag myself out of bed, go teach the class, come back and sleep. That's all I could do. This is within a week happened, and 3 weeks I had to do it before I could see the person next, and so on. And then after that, I realized that something is wrong. I started thinking about it, and so on and so forth. Started measuring. At home, it was fine. It will never cross 135 by 85. Things like that. Then I started doing this. I would measure at home. I used to go from home, so I'd measure at home, go bicycle. Whatever measurement happens, there happens. Then come back, measure at home immediately. Okay. 135 by 85, 175 by 105, 135 by 85, or around that. Okay. I don't know what is happening here. And then I went on for about a month like this to convince myself it was all fine. Then I tried telling the doctor won't believe it, of course. No, you continue medicine, this thing. I didn't want medicines. I didn't want to continue the medicine. So then went on like this. Then you bring your own machine that you used to measure. Took my machine to measure. Same thing. And then I realized I had something called a white coat syndrome, which should have been ruled out right in the beginning at the big hospital, which didn't happen. I lost 1.5 years of my life to waste drugs because of a white coat syndrome. Okay. At that point in time, against doctor's advice, the doctor still said you take this, statin, and so on and so forth. Cut out everything, but I kept measuring. I would measure religiously every morning, every evening. No change. Around that, if there was a tough meeting in the department, it will go up slightly, and then it will come down, and so on and so forth. Okay. Then against doctor's advice, I don't prescribe this to you, but against doctor's advice, I went off all drugs, right? Rightly so, because at that time, soon after that, it was known that statins don't do the work they're supposed to do, and so on. And by the way, you know what statins do? They can do nothing to the cholesterol that you take. They cut off cholesterol synthesis by your own organ. That's the way they work. Okay. So it is to pass a test of having a certain number of BP or having a certain number of cholesterol. So that I don't know whether it's an appropriate view to take. And then from that time onwards, whenever I faced a stressful situation, I used to take beta blocker was one that worked for me. I used to take that, and the frequency, the needed frequency came down to once in 3 months. No other medicines. It's been so for this many years. You need to know some basis. Don't go and, by the way, doctors are very sensitive. Okay, never counter them. Okay. It so happened, this is another interesting story. Before the cataract surgery, I needed clearance from blood tests in terms of sugar, in terms of various things. And it so happened it was in May 2022. June was the surgery. I think in June, earlier part of June 2022, during just after the pandemic or just when the pandemic was ending. So all activity, exercise was pretty much nil. I couldn't do these 10-kilometer cycling that I did every day. I don't have a BP issue in terms of a genetic issue. Both my parents didn't have BP and so on. Didn't have sugar. No, not BP. Sugar, BP, I don't know. Sugar and so on, but the sugar level was high, slightly high. So I was asked to get, you need to get approval from some doctor there before any surgery can be performed. That doctor refused. I didn't realize that doctor was a diabetologist. I mean, I didn't read the board when I went to him for the approval. So that guy said, no. I said, it is high, 140 something it was, the fasting level. So I said, I will do exercise and bring it down. I've not been doing exercise. I don't want medicines. He said, do you want surgery? I said, yeah. With exercise, it will take a long time. So you take medicines. You are diabetic. You take medicines. I said, fine. I had to get my surgeries done. 4 years of whatever, the cataracts maturing and so on and so forth. So took that, and then my ophthalmologist said, yeah, we need a certain sugar level, but that's not as crucial as the BP thing. So it came down in 2 days. The second reading was fine, and therefore the surgery is better. Okay, so till the period of the surgery, because both eyes, therefore it took about a month and so on. I took that medicine to show my blood level at an acceptable level, and then I discontinued with it. So that is, and it was fine. But I measure once in glucose levels once in 3 months and so on. So they keep measuring. Good to measure, good to know. It shouldn't be too high, definitely, because there are correlations that high glucose levels lead to difficulties. I need to look at those studies again. Is it the glucose level, or is it the medicines that you take for glucose? I don't know. That lead to major complications and so on and so on. So it's a complex system. You need to pay attention. Any questions, comments?